Welcome to Flight Path, a brand new podcast from Tern's R&D exec team. Each week, we invite you into the cockpit for insider's look at our latest launches, current projects, and upcoming innovations. We're so excited to have you on this journey, so let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Flight Path. This is going to be a really fun episode. We have a lot to cover. Before we do that, we got to do the obligatory intros and the reminder to click on the like button. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. If you're watching it on or listening to it on Spotify. But my name is David Shull, CEO and co-founder here at Tern, joined by two incredible guests. We've got Brad, who heads up all design for Tern, and Molly, who leads our product org. And as usual, we're here going to talk about everything that's new in the Tern product. And I have to say, I think we're sort of building a following here. People are in the Facebook group right now asking, when's the podcast going to go live? There's the fans want to know when it's going to be ready. And here we are just now recording it. So I think we've really kind of made it.
Yeah, I love
That's what fame feels like, I assume, is that there's people asking in the Facebook group when this will be ready. So let's...
There are more people asking about the podcast than Molly's weekly product update. We're competing against ourselves.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair. But it is kind of fun. I like this game that's also developing in the Facebook group of how many times can we beat Molly to announcing a feature? I think it's pretty fun to watch.
And it's every time they beat me.
Yeah. Well, Scott today, we're going to talk about dates and we'll get into it. But you launched it, and then what was literally I saw in Slack, it's live. And then 4 minutes later, Scott is posting in Facebook group being refresh the page.
Yeah. If we ever do awards for anything that's, I think he's going to win for the speediest detection for sure.
Yeah. That'd be kind of a fun award, number of scoops or spoilers, I guess, that they found. We have to start tracking that. Let's get into week in review before we talk about all the stuff that we've shipped. It's been a big week. Molly, kick things off. How's your week been?
Week has been great. Yeah. We shipped, I guess Friday technically, but advisor reporting, which was really big. The sorting of the trip board, which was huge. This date internationalization, which was another just really top request for so long. I'm sure I'm missing things. Just a lot of really good stuff this week that made people really happy. So it was a fun week.
Brad, how's your week?
Also really fun. Echoing all those things Molly said. It's also been a fast-paced week for us. Molly and I are both out next week. I'm actually technically out today, but I was so excited about all the things we shipped this week. Because I have to join the podcast to talk about these things. So yeah, it's a bit of a fast-paced 4-day week for me. But then also we're doing these big, some planning for some more big strategic projects. So a lot of context switching between we're shipping literally 5 things this week. Yeah. Also, how do we plan all of next year? So it's been an exciting week.
Yeah, that just a little bit of context switching, right? And it's kind of fun. We've got the leadership team kind of all coming together in about a week and a half, 2 weeks to do this kind of annual planning exercise. But things don't stop, right? So we had all these things shipping. I feel like this is, again, going to be kind of a catch-up session for me, because I was out with Katie all week at the Future Leaders in Travel event in the Dominican Republic. Which was just such a cool event. It's definitely up there with one of our favorite conferences that we've been to. And there's just such an energy about the future of this industry and people rethinking what does technology look like in a travel agency, and how do we kind of push our thinking on that, and talking to incredible leaders from suppliers. And it was just a really special event, and the kind of farewell party that they put on was unlike anything I've ever seen. So huge shout out to the Hilton La Romana and North Star team on an incredible event. But it means I'm coming into this Friday with way less context than what happened this week, I feel than I normally have. And also maybe a little bit of a lower energy because didn't get into late last night. So I'm excited to hear all about it. Brad, thank you for joining on your day off, because I'm worried without your star power, our ratings would really just drop. So thanks for making the time.
I do what I can.
And we're going to jump in. Molly, you talked about some of the things that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about reporting. We're going to talk about the sorting of the board feature. We're going to talk about updates on the AI side. We're going to talk about dates. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff here that has really been focused on listening to what you, our users, need to make sure that Tern is working for you and how we built it. So let's start with the reporting going live. Molly, you said that launched on Friday of last week. Let's start off with maybe like quick refresher. I know we talked about it on a previous podcast, but like what is the feature? And then maybe some advice on how advisors can kind of get the most out of it.
Yeah, and this was kind of part 2 of unlocking the ability for advisors to manage their commission across all of their trips and then see reporting for all trips. So a really big kind of combined set of features to just understand your business. On the reporting side, you can understand gross sales, received commission, expected commission. You can drill down by dates, supplier. So it's a really powerful tool, again, to just understand both projections and earnings for your business. And in terms of like making the most of these features, I think the number one tip is just make sure that you're thinking about them as a part of your overall trip planning process in turn. So when you're first building out your trip, make sure as you're adding in those activities, even if you're not exactly sure what the commission or the commission date will be, put in, your best guess expected commission amount and when you expect to get it. When you're then actually booking these things with your suppliers, make sure you come back into Tern and mark them as booked and, input the confirmation number and stuff like that. And then finally, when you get that commission from the supplier, again, make sure you're coming into Tern and logging that. So if you kind of put that just into your general process, those reports and commission tracking should be really, really powerful tools for you.
And I think that part, just emphasizing what you said there in terms of how do you build this into your process. And it really goes back to even at the early days of building Tern, we've kind of said, we don't think about the proposal and the itinerary as this like totally separate thing. We think about this as part of the planning journey, right? And as you start to like sketch out pricing, you may have an idea of that commission. So just put it in while you're doing the work of helping your clients understand what the cost of this kind of experience is going to be. When you're making the booking, it's now a click of a button, right? Mark it as booked so that you can kind of keep track of that forward-looking forecast. And then, of course, once you actually get that commission, marking it. And what that does, and if you haven't looked at it yet in Tern, you should go look. It's on the reporting tab in the system. It gives you this bird's eye view of the health of your business from a financial perspective. And this was a big piece that we talked a lot about actually at the conference we were at, which is understanding the finances historically has been really tough for a lot of advisors. And it's one of those things just easy to kind of not really invest in, just assume like, oh, my host agency will pay me whatever I earned. But that makes it really hard to run the business and to actually pay yourself and to know like, what are your financial goals? And so I'm really excited about this feature as a way to give that to advisors sort of out of the box. As long as you said exactly while you build this into your process, it'll be there. You can use it to set goals. You can use it to understand like what revenue are you going to be expecting in 6 months, in 12 months. And we've tried to make it really easy. Brad, anything on your side as you kind of thought about the reporting feature? I know we've talked a little bit about this, but anything you want to add before we move on to the next set of features?
My one thing to add is I think we forgot that we released another improvement to that early this week, which is the ability to say that you're expecting more commission. So we know like in some cases you get a first payment, like for a cruise, you might get a first payment and then you get another payment later. Well, previously, as soon as you logged one payment, we started kind of showing that as received across the board. And so you then might have a hard time knowing, wait, which of these am I still going to be expecting more from? Do I need to come back and make sure I've actually gotten that? So we had a little small improvement there as well that I know some people are very hype about in the Facebook group. So small but mighty, maybe.
No, thank you, Brett. I actually, when I was taking a few notes on things to touch on for the podcast, I wrote that down and forgot to say it. Thank you. That's a big one. It's really important.
It's kind of fun. Cool. We're just like forgetting the things we've shipped.
I know, so many things.
The list is too long. And I think it's such a cool example. We talk a lot about this on the podcast and just like how we think about development, right? But it's like you ship something literally Friday of last week. People start to use it more and more. And like we just very quickly understand the importance of this like new thing that needs to be built. In this case, like I'm going to expect more commission. And it's live, 2-3 days later? Like I think that's really, really cool just how we think about building product, how responsive we want to be with these types of features, and how quickly we try and learn. Speaking of other things that people have been asking for maybe a little bit longer than 2 days, sorting the board. Let's talk about that. This is something that has been coming up over and over again. I think it was the number one feature in our feedback request tool. Is that right?
Number one. Yep. Yep.
With like over 100 people having voted on this.
150.
Wow. That's like, so this mattered. And maybe to start, Brad, like, what is the feature? What did we do? Was it super easy? Bring it to life for us.
Yeah, and maybe let's just say when we say sorting the board, what we're saying there is, in Tern, the main screen you land on when you log in is a view of all of your trips in Tern, right? Everyone who's a Tern user knows this. And you can decide if you want to show those things just in a standard table, or if you want to organize by the status of the trip, kind of like a Trello board if you've ever used Trello. And what you could do, what you still can't do, is you can like move trips really easily from one status to the next, drag them across kind of your workflow as trips are kind of going through the planning and booking process in real life. But part of that kind of dragging between different columns meant that you also had to manually drag in order of like how you wanted those trips to be ordered within a column. It seems like nice to be able to do to manually do that, but when you have tens, hundreds of trips, thinking about like manually making sure that the most important ones are at the top of the list is like a lot of work, and also just kind of an annoyance. Some folks even like had things where they were just out of order even though when they tried to reorder them. And so really what we understood is people for the most part wanted the trips that are coming up next to be at the top of the list. Like the most important thing for me to like keep my eye on and make sure I'm like finalizing all the details are the ones that are coming up next. For some reason, I have such a hard time talking about dates when it comes to this, but that's the concept. And so what we've been able to do now is you can still move trips between columns, but the columns now actually are automatically sorted. And you can decide if you want to sort by trip date, when it was last updated, or just alphabetically. And yeah, those things, it seems small, but again, it's like a huge workflow improvement to not have to like scroll or search for the trip. It's just like, oh yeah, the ones I'm most likely looking for are right at the top.
And being able to choose right between like how you want those to be sorted and have it locked into like, oh, it has to be by date, right? You can choose these kind of different methods that make the most sense. From
I have to add shout out to Zach who built this. Basically, there was a challenge issued that he couldn't build it in like 3 days. And there was also two options, one much prettier, better design, and one that we were kind of like, it'll get the job done. And he did the pretty design. I think he met the challenge. So big shout out.
And the context there is that like the trip board is one of the first things that we built, and trips are so complex and there's versions and there's just like so much goes into that like anytime we have to like touch the boards, it feels like it's like this tar pit of time. And so yeah, that was pretty funny. But I saw the look in Zach's eyes like the end of last week. He's like, it will be done in less than 3 days, and it will be done great.
Really think about how complex it was before he committed to that. Once he got into it, and then he was messaging me being like, oh, how do we, because we just hadn't considered that like right now you can manually reorder them, and like that conflicts with sort like basically setting a sort order. And so we had to figure out like what the UX is for dragging to another column, but not making it look like you could like put it in a certain order only for then it to like move, to a different place on the board.
Well, and there's like this old code, right, where like it kind of let you reorder it, but like depending on like the version and like all, I mean, props to Zach. It's like, wow. But we got it figured out. The people are loving it. I mean, that was another one that was kind of like spoiled, I think, a little bit in the best way. We use spoiled it, but it's like not, I think it's fun, right? To like when people find it, and it's like cooler from the team when people do that. So we do love that. But yeah, that was like very hype in the Facebook group, and the kind of response of just being able to use that, I think, is really, really special. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to the next big one, which is dates?
Let's go to dates.
Let's do dates. Okay, I'm excited about this one. And Molly, you alluded to this. You used this word, I think, localization, right? Because it was really interesting, even in the feedback tool, um, looking at like how people asked for this feature, right? Because we have users actually all over the world. We've got users in Canada and in South Africa and in the UK and Australia and in the US, obviously. It's where a lot of them are. And it turns out that everybody uses different date formats, right? So when they make a request to change the date format, it's not like everybody is aligned on what date format they want it to be changed to. Most people are aligned that they want it to be changed, but it's not actually to a specific format. Um, so maybe Molly, kicking off with you, like what does that mean to localize the date? How is that different than just changing it? And kind of how does this feature actually work behind the scenes?
Yeah, so when we think about localization, it's really like regardless of who you are, where you're at, like what your language is, when you log in, things just like feel intuitive to you. So it's not like where everything's just like US format or, and so how we kind of did this is we look at the language settings on a person's device, so on their computer, on their browser. And there's like a language set. So it's like US English is just one example. And that there's then pretty clear kind of format guidelines for what we should expect for all of the various ways of displaying dates. So, it could be month, day, year. It could be, you know, December 12th, 2024. Like it's, there's lots of different variations, but there's an expected format depending on the language settings on the browser. And so we're basically pulling from that to then just without you having to do anything, kind of put the dates in an intuitive format for you. And because it's using the language, it's not going to like change the format on you if you go traveling in Europe, right? It's really just like what you're used to when you're using your computer.
It's like your browser, right? And like
Yeah.
it's like, US English, but there's also a language setting for Canada and for the UK, right? So like even within a language, it's that localization layer that's like built into the browser, which is really cool. And you kind of mentioned that it's using the language, it's using the format, which means everybody is getting, or at least in the ones that we support right now, is getting this kind of very localized version. That has kind of some interesting design implications. And like, Brad, I'm curious how this is another one of those where at the surface I feel like so cool, like everyone just sees the date in their language, like happy days, but it's actually more than that, right? It's like what did the design thought look like kind of going into this?
Yeah, and I know Molly mentioned like, oh, there's like pretty standard date formatting for a specific region. I think that's true. Also, for someone who's in the US, you're like, oh, the standard is just like month, day, year. So every time I'm doing a design, that's like how I would either write it out, like January 1st or like 01, slash 31, whatever the date is. But on the design side now, we have to both think about like, okay, does this look good written out in like the way I would normally write it? And does it also like still make sense and look good in other languages? And like a general just date format, like putting a whole like month, day, year, it's pretty easy. We try to do some, we'll say like smarter things in some areas of the UI where we want to like minimize the amount of noise. And so we have like if it's the same month or same year, like don't repeat that. So instead of saying like January like 3rd, 2024 to January 7th, 2024, you just say January 3rd through 7th, 2024. So you don't like duplicate those things when you have a range. But that gets complicated because in the US, you might say like, oh, the 3rd through the 7th of January, 2024. So you have to like flip the order and think about when you show and hide details. So like spend some good amount of time with an engineer, Spencer, like pairing through that and making sure we got the different variations right. And then of course there's regional differences. So it's possible too that like what we think is right based on our research, and in Canada people are like, wait, no, like this isn't how we talk about, like this isn't how we'd write it. And like we've set it up in a way where we can swap those things out pretty easily as we need to. And then as more regions, as we get more users in different regions, we can always add other locales as well. Like if there's specifics for, to your point, like Australia or other areas, like we can layer those details in. But we're thinking on the design side is kind of like setting the formats in a way where hopefully we don't have to think about it every time, as long as we get kind of like the setup right, like we're doing right now.
It's so fun that we're able to have these kind of conversations and do this level of localization like at this stage at the company. And because when I was in at Handshake in the UK, it was such a pain to go back through this massive application and having to like actually do all this localization work. And so the fact that like we get to deal with this now, and just knowing that a lot of the text throughout the app is actually kind of ready for translation in the future, so that it will be still work. So, when I don't know if we'll do it right now, although if you are listening to this and you think that having other languages supported in Tern would be helpful, we have a feedback card for that, and we'd love to know if you're interested. But it's kind of using that same foundation that we're using for dates to actually now start to say, like, okay, maybe someday we offer Tern in French or German or in Spanish. And so it's pretty cool that like we get to take those learnings and that experience and set Tern up to be this kind of global player from a much earlier stage. So props to the engineering team who built that. Props to you two who were like actually figuring out how to do that. I think this is going to be a really cool thing for us long term.
One other just like, oh, I think we're probably going to say the same thing. Just one other thing that was probably like an interesting peek behind the hood for this feature. We also wanted to make sure when we introduced this change, there wouldn't be confusion around swapping like the position of month, day when it was just like, 12, for example. Actually, that's a terrible example. We always use the worst.
We
example.
always use that. I was gonna make a joke that it's like anytime we kind of come up with an example, like the brain's just like June 6th. You're like, nope, that's the one date in June that doesn't work, right?
But yeah, so for things like traveler birthdays, passport expiration dates, we also had a set of work to actually just like print out the month so that it was like not ambiguous at all. When we introduced this change, you had to like remember the old format to the new. So there was just like a lot of thought to make sure that we weren't introducing any confusion, especially in those critical areas.
So cool.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Molly. Word for word.
Yeah.
And it's like live, and it is. I mean, I think as we were talking about this, maybe the last thing on the dates is just like watching people try and use dates in a format that they're not comfortable with, which is this constant source of friction. And like, there's very few people that like liked the original format, and so it's really fun that this is now got a much more flexible kind of underlying architecture that we can continue to roll out and improve over time. So really excited that is out there, and stay tuned for more of that kind of localization work to continue to happen. There's a couple other things that we've improved that came from feedback. One of them was there was a whole thread in the Facebook group around these kind of cruise notification emails, and maybe throwing to Molly, like, what are these cruise notification emails, and why were people getting so many of them at weird hours of the day, and what are we doing now?
Yeah, so we have a cruise library in Tern where you can pull in kind of pre-built out cruises through our content partner Widgety. So you can, it's pretty magical, right? Like you can just pull in an entire cruise with all the ports and times and all of that stuff, which is really cool. However, between the time that you pull those things in and the actual cruise, things change. And so our provider, Widgety, lets us know, oh, this port is different, this departure time is different, things like that. And we want to make sure that you're aware of those things too, when they change, so that you can take action. And if you feel like it's an important change to kind of communicate to your client, you can let them know proactively via email. If you want to just update your itinerary, you can do that. And previously, we sent them like in the middle of the night, and weren't actually where some people got like without do not disturb on their phone, and they didn't have they had like notifications for emails, so we were like waking people up, which we felt just terrible about. We also weren't we were sending them kind of regardless if the itinerary itself you had rejected it, or if the trip was like canceled or archived. So like maybe you were proposing like 7 different cruises to your client, and like you rejected all but one of them, you were continuing to get these emails about the rejected ones. So just overall not a good experience. And so we now send them at a more reasonable hour, Monday mornings. And then we also only send them now if it's not a rejected itinerary, if it's not a canceled or archived trip. And in the future, we'd also love to do more of like auto update my cruise, like a better experience in general for those changes, it is quite a bit of work. So it's just us looking at that against all the other things that we could do. But we're hoping that these first set of changes goes a long way to help with that.
Yeah, and it's just to unpack the like a little bit of work too, right? It's how do we know what to update automatically? Like you probably still want to be in your loop. If there's like a significant change to an itinerary, then like that could actually impact the other things that you've planned around the cruise. And so right now we've taken the approach of it's better to let you, the expert advisor, decide if this is something you want to take action on or not, right? If it's a
Yeah.
port departure change by 30 minutes, like maybe you don't, it doesn't matter that much. In fact, your clients may benefit from knowing being back to the ship 30 minutes before it actually leaves. And so you think you can just leave it. If it's not, if it's something bigger, then you can go in and make those updates and those changes.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, like if you've added your own stuff, we don't want to overwrite it. So it's like it is harder than it would seem at first glance.
yeah, but the emails hopefully are something that you can use, and hopefully it's not waking you up in a panic at 3:30 a.m. when we're running these kind of background jobs and kicking them all off, and your phone's buzzing out of control, and you're like, "What happened? Is something wrong with my client?" It's like, "Oh no, Tern's just sending me 100 emails." But so that's been better. That's been fixed. Thank you for the Facebook feedback. Right? It works. We listen. Um, Okay, let's also just talk about some other quick site improvements. I think, Molly, I'm going to come back to you for this one. Like, we've made some updates on suppliers, maybe some updates on performance. Like anything you want to share there?
Oh, yeah. So I cleaned up over 300 duplicate suppliers over the weekend. So this was
Whew.
where like the name would match exactly, or like it had different case sensitivities. So like the capitalization was different. So merged those all together. So it should feel a lot nicer, a lot cleaner. I also merged like 50 Marriotts together. So that was pretty crazy. But actually, as a part of merging the all the Marriotts, one really cool change that came out of it was I realized the reason people were creating so many Marriotts was because it wasn't appearing in the top 10 results, and we only showed 10 results. So every single time you went to search for Marriott, you had to create a new Marriott, which is crazy. So we
Do people
increased.
book a lot of Marriott? Is that a
Not,
hotel
not
that
even
it's
very
people
popular.
know? Yeah.
They're just like yikes. So we actually improved the ranking when you search to better match the results that you're seeing, and we increased the results 25 instead of 10. So hopefully that shouldn't happen again. And then we also introduced a constraint so that duplicate names cannot get created moving forward. So if there's already a Marriott, as long as it's spelled the same way, you can't create another one. So with all these changes, I think just it should feel a lot nicer and cleaner, and kind of prevent some issues moving forward, which is great. And then you had also said, oh, site performance. Was that? Yeah, we just continued to do a lot more on site performance. I know if you didn't catch our last podcast, our CTO Brian joined and talked a lot about this, but just continued efforts there to make the site feel snappier.
And I think the conversations piece also just like one of the big areas, right? Where like if
Yeah.
you're searching through emails and like some of those were taking 30, 40 seconds, sometimes they just time out after a minute and you get like an error page. And now that should be a lot snappier in most cases, as an example of that. So really kind of fun to see. And I think on the supplier side, people often ask like, why can't I have just my own database of suppliers? I would just want to see it. And this is one of those kind of longer term vision things where having, this kind of collective database with a personalization layer on top of it is going to be a game changer in the travel industry. It's hard to see it now because like it's just searching and you've got your kind of personalization where you're adding your terms and conditions to that supplier. But when we think about what we want to do long term and making it easier for you to collaborate with suppliers, to be able to kind of access your really cool resources for building itineraries, like this kind of centralized, clean database is going to be a really big foundational element to that. And so these things may seem minor today, but give us a year or two, and they're going to be you'll hopefully see all the dots connecting. And this is where some of the annual planning that we're doing is coming into play. So lots of stuff. I'll tease that a little bit. I want to talk just kind of a little bit, and Brad, I'm going to loop you into this because you did a bunch of research on this before, but I'm super excited for a very small change that nobody will actually see directly, but hopefully it improves how they're interacting with AI. And that's this tweak that we made around dates. So maybe Brad, do you want to talk a little bit, because you did quite a bit of research with Spencer on these kind of two paths, right? And the path that we had went down originally was optimizing for trying to infer the dates correctly, and then there's this kind of path that we've gone down now, what I can talk about. Do you want to just like summarize a little bit of that research that you did? Going off
Yeah,
script
maybe
here.
let's just queue up the problem when we're talking about dates.
Yes.
Um, there's a few things here. What we really want to make sure is when you try to import an itinerary or an activity using AI, that the dates are right. What right means is interesting because sometimes the itinerary could have no dates on it, and you're like, oh, when I import this, it should just like match the dates of my trip. Should magically work. The other times the itinerary might have dates on it, but without a year. So it's like, oh, this is like March 12th through the 14th. We're like, okay, like we can do our best to figure out what year that is, but like unfortunately the AI doesn't actually know what today is or what the year is, and we also don't know necessarily. It doesn't know necessarily what year the trip you're planning is in. Is it March 2025, 26, etc.? So like that can be a challenge. And then other times when you take like the entire content from a website, like you're taking like a trip from, we'll say like Viator, or not a trip, but like an individual activity, trying to pull it in for your clients quickly, there can be random dates on that page that are like dates of reviews or like just dates when they updated their terms and conditions. Like there can be lots of noise in there, and so it's hard for the AI to know like what should I put as the date of this thing. And so in the past, what we tried to do is at least say like, hey, either the year of the trip is like the right year, or we just say this is the current year if we didn't know what year you were planning your trip in. But instead, I think we're now optimizing for like sending it specific dates of the activity or the itinerary, which means that if you do have an itinerary that you're importing that doesn't match exactly what you have already set up in Tern, or if the date of the activity you have doesn't match what's on whatever the external or the content you're putting in, we'll kind of like force it more likely into your current date range. But the we think that's a better experience. Like we trust you to have the right dates on your itinerary in the first place, and like instead of being like, oh, are you sure you don't want to extend this trip by a year so that this thing fits? We're like, okay, you probably don't want to do that. Like, let's just force it in here, and you can adjust if it ends up not correct.
And that's really exactly where this would come up, right? Is like you'd get, it would pick up the review date of 2023 and it'd be like, oh, this must be in January of 2023, even though you're planning a trip for September of 2025. And now you have like a 2 year long trip, and it looks like we've got so many support tickets where it's like, my trip is gone. You're like, your trip is not gone. It's just messed up, which is not great, but it's not gone. And so it's like kind of fixing that. So exactly like Brad said, like the best practice where you're going to get the best value is if you're planning a trip from September 1st of 2025 to September 14th of 2025. When you create that trip, put the dates in, and we prompt you to do that. You can not put in dates, and then we'll pass that date along. So if you upload that PDF from a DMC, we'll tell AI basically, hey, this advisor is planning a trip from September 1st through September 15th of 2025. Here's the content. Now we do tell it if you find content outside of that you should consider that. But to Brad's point, we expect that the error states will be more likely to change the dates to fit within the bounds of where you put that activity or where you defined your trip dates. But we think, again, that will be a much better error state. So hopefully no more 700-day trips being created by AI. But definitely let us know if you do still see those errors come up. Let us know, and we will do some kind of prompt research.
Yeah, and the other thing that's been thrown out there, if dates continue to be the challenge, is maybe allowing folks to just like to remove the dates or to edit them before accepting, because it's like everything else here looks great. There's like a multi-page itinerary that I'd love to get in, but the date's wrong, and so like we could layer in little things like that to let you tweak it before.
Yeah, that like line editing, right? Of being able to say like I want to take this but not this, and like there's more, obviously, like that's it continues to be more work, but I think we'll definitely be a part of the AI experience someday. I think we made it through our packed agenda. I mean, there's so many other things that that are happening kind of behind the scenes, but I think we're in the week ahead, and the week ahead I think is going to be a little bit more fun, at least for both of you. Why don't we, because both Molly and Brad are out next week, so we're going to do a special podcast where it's going to be the founders of Tern, so myself, Brian, who was on last week, and Katie, maybe sharing kind of just some more of the story of Tern, answering any questions that folks have. So it'll be a little bit of a different kind of episode. But Brad, Molly, like, where are you going? What are you gonna do there? Like, tell the people what your week looks like. Maybe starting with Brad.
Yeah, and before I do that, I just wanted to say, like, I think we shipped like 5 or 6 things this week, and we're like, oh yeah, we went through the list, but like, holy crap, we shipped that many things. Like, we should be a little more like hype about that, even or like, oh, we're so tired, but like, of all the stuff we did this week.
That's so true. Yeah, and maybe also, I know we called out in this episode like Zach and Spencer, but just like huge shout out to the rest of the engineering team as well. I mean, it's just incredible to see how much they get done, and it is really, really special. So Matt, Brian, Matthias, we talked about Spencer and Zach. Like, I mean, that's like the powerhouse right now. And by the way, they're doing all this like shipping of code. Props to Molly and Brad, like, for actually figuring out like the designs and context switching across this, while also spending at least 4.5 hours with me this week on this long-term planning. Like, I'm obviously bullish on Tern, but it really comes down to just like this incredible team that we have and like what we're able to do. And like, you look at it's just so fun. Every week is so fun, tiring but fun.
Yeah, so that's why I'm taking vacation next week. So,
so when anybody asks, people do get to sleep. People do take time off. Like, yes, it is.
You heard it here. But yeah, I think I mentioned this last week, but we're taking my partner and I are taking his parents to both Norway and Denmark. We're going to Oslo, Ålesund, and Copenhagen. We'll be there for roughly 10 days. Like, we're leaving today, get back Sunday. So really excited. We've been to Oslo before, but not the other 2 areas, and it'll be fun to be with his parents this time. Just like a different type of travel.
Showing around and taking the worst. We talked a lot, like, worst red eye. It's like New York to anywhere in Western Europe, or even there, it's like just not enough sleep. So good luck with that part of the trip, but the rest should be fun. And Molly, what are you up to?
It was so funny because we were on a user research call this week, and Brad told him about his travel, and then I told him about my travel, and he was like so excited about Brad's, and he was like, "Ooh, yours sounds cool too." So mine's a little less exciting. But I planned kind of a surprise birthday trip for my husband, Zach, who works at Tern, to one of our favorite places, Park City, Utah. We spent like a month there a few years ago, and we're just getting away from the kid and enjoying some time. I'm pregnant with number 2, so before I get into my 3rd trimester, so it'll just be like a really fun kind of quiet, do some hiking and reading and unplugging. And I do, by the way, still plan to do the product update for next week and post that. So there'll be some good stuff still coming that we'll be launching for that next week.
Well, I think we just leave it to the users next week, honestly.
I know, just right? At this point, really, but I'll do it.
Well, I'm so excited to hear about both of your trips. It's going to be a quiet. We've got like so much of the team is out, so it's going to be a quieter week next week, but that'll be fun. I'm like, ramping up hiring. We've got so many amazing applications for some of these roles that we have open, which is super exciting to be growing the team. Continue to dig in on some of this like strategic planning, kind of big, kind of questions that we've all been wrestling with the week. So that'll be fun. And then I'm like actually home this weekend, which is like, just honestly, I've been looking forward to it so much. Like, I haven't had a long weekend at home in like, I can't even remember. Been traveling a lot for these conferences. And so mine's even more lame than yours, Molly. But
okay,
that's
I didn't say mine was lame. So like,
yeah, neither did I. That's not what I meant. I mean, it was just different than Norway. Like,
sure.
All right, y'all. Well, have a fantastic trip. If people do have questions for next week that you want us to talk about, put those in the comments. Go ahead and like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time, everyone. Thanks so much.